Anybody know this book? Leadership is an Art by Max Dupree. I think it's out of the 70s. Let's see what the... Maybe it's sooner than that, but... it doesn't give a publishing. Oh, there it is. Nope. No publishing date. Timeless. But leadership is an art. It's not a science. What is leadership? He writes, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. In between the two, the leader becomes a servant and a debtor. This sums up the progress of an artful leader. Concepts of leadership, ideas about leadership, and leadership practices are subject of much thought, discussion, writing, teaching, and learning. True leaders are sought after and cultivated. Leadership is not easy to explain. A friend of mine characterizes leaders simply like this. Leaders don't inflict pain, they bear pain. The goal of thinking hard about leadership is not to produce a great or charismatic or well-known leaders. The measure of the leadership is not the quality of the head, but the tone of the body. The signs of outstanding leadership are primarily among the followers. Are the followers reaching their potential? Are they learning, serving? Do they achieve the required results? Do they change with grace, manage conflict? I would like to ask you to think about the concept of leadership in a certain way, to try to think about a leader, in the words of the gospel writer Luke, as one who serves. Leadership is a concept of owing certain things to the institution. It is a way of thinking about stewardship as contrasted with ownership. Robert Greenleaf has written an excellent book about this idea in Servant Leadership. The art of leadership requires us to think about leader as stewards in terms of relationship, of assets, legacy, momentum and effectiveness, of civility and values. So as I said, we are doing the 3 P's of leadership. And we did purpose. We talked about that, and that is when you get this, turn open to the 4th page, 3rd, 4th page where it says procedures, purposes, and prudence. How many more? Now, just to quickly recap, the greatest commandment, what should be all in our center, is shall love the Lord with all our hearts, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like it, we shall love our neighbor as ourselves. This is the ground of what the church, what any organization, what the world should be. Loving something beyond ourselves, loving those we see and can't see, and loving ourselves. So we have 3 things pulled out. We have the mission statement, the open and affirming covenant, and the Just Peace Church. And as we have read in the opening of our board of directors meeting, let's read the statement of faith, or the mission statement, mission and purpose statement together. First Congregational United Church of Christ is an open, inclusive church that exists to worship God and practice the gospel of Jesus Christ. We welcome all people of goodwill who seek to share the love of God and honor the diversity of creation in a spirit of tolerance and flexibility. As a Just Peace Church, we invite all who seek the reign of God to join us in reaching out in healing ministry, working for justice, witnessing for peace, striving to overcome all forms of oppression. We recognize baptism and communion. Now, you can read over the others at your leisure. And let's flip the page over to the title should be Procedures. How do we do this? We talked about the whys, but now we get into the hows. And as I said, in our Constitution right now, yet authority invested in membership. I was talking to my spiritual director on Thursday, and we were talking about this a little bit, and she says, just about every church, every pastor I'm talking with, they're going through the same thing. What does it mean to be a member, or what other name can be used for a member, or how does that work? In my last church, they had more friends than members, so they put in their constitution that anyone willing to accept can be called into a leader. So they can be a board member, a Christian Ed member, or any elected a position. But they decided but only members get to vote on who's a leader. So I said, so they could be the moderator or the treasurer, but they can't vote in a congregational meeting. Well, if they're not going to be a member, how it works for them. So, as we go along in this church, we have options of how we're going to go forward, of how we're going to define ourselves, who's in and who's out, how we conduct business. It's an open-ended process. So part of being a legally church, part of being a chartered organization that's within the Minnesota, we have liability that we pay as part of our stewardship, and that liability covers if we act in good faith, not willfully or recklessly have misconduct. So the Board of Trustees, we have regular meetings, we have the meetings published, we vote on things. Committee members right now, committees are all volunteered right now, and most of them, if not all of them, most of them have their own sets of policies and rules. We're starting 2 new ones, worship and faith or Christian Ed, however we're going to call themselves, and we need to get those in so that we can have that in there, so that we can say if someone comes after us and says, well, you did this or you didn't do this right, we can have these bases covered. And we also know how to, when crises arise, we can say, well, let's check and see what the bylaws say, let's see what our policies are, and 99% of those things will be covered by them. So congregational meetings, which we have 2 a year, a summer and a winter, and others can be called, for election of officers and directors, approving a financial plan, receiving the financial and program reports, and transacting any other business as necessary. So even the board of directors are limited in what they can do. There's very specific limits on that. They can't spend more than 10% of the budget or a certain amount of the assets without coming to the member, coming to the wider congregation. So that protects everybody. And then we have a safe church policy, and mainly that's dealing with working with children and working with vulnerable people. We are in the process of updating that. We have the grievance policy, so we have a way to talk about if there is conflict, especially between individuals within the church, within committees or whatever, that we can work through that. And as we know, committees are filled by volunteers. I did not know that until we came to our summer meeting, and I'm like, well, aren't we going to vote them in? And oh, okay. Never done it that way before in a church, but it's a grand experiment. And finances, especially within the board of directors, they have responsibility of approving the monthly financial reports, and the church has the responsibility, the wider church has to propose a budget and to receive the annual report in the winter at the winter meeting to look it over and ask questions. We're supposed to ask questions about, well, why did we spend this, or where is this money coming from, or how did that money go? It protects Kevin, and it also protects all of us, so that we can wisely use our resources, our offerings, our building in a way that furthers our mission. So that brings us into stewardship. And stewardship is not just it's not just a once a year thing, but stewardship in its full breadth is all responsible, all of us who claim any kind of affiliation with this church are responsible for the finances, church, and ministry. Now, there are people and we have the finance committee, yes, we have the building and grounds committee, yes, and all of that brings us together, but we as the church are responsible to make sure that we're choosing the right things, we're doing it the right way, we're being prudent, which we'll get into of how we do things. And as one of my conference ministers said, realize the budget is a blueprint. It's not a blueprint. It's not a written in stone type of thing, because this is our best guess of how much money we'll bring in. This is the best guess where the money's going to go, But as the year goes on, different things come up, different needs are made, different emergencies of resources or lack of resources are going. So then communication. Is the board and committee open for others to join as appropriate, and do they know when and how you are meeting? The board of directors has gotten a lot better about this, I hear. Our other committees, they need to work on this a little better, because we tell each other when we're going to meet, but do we have that in there? And part of it is on me that I didn't put this into the newsletter, but part of this is if you're a committee and you're going to meet, you need to make sure that the church administrator, this Carol Morgan, knows, so that she can put it into the calendar, that she can put it into the newsletter. And where can they find that your committee is doing and how you are going about it? Again, transparency and openness. This has gotten us into trouble in the past. So, if it doesn't go into the newsletter, it should be on our website. Even just a paragraph. We met. These are the things we talked about. Here's the decisions we made. It doesn't have to be real formal, but we should let the wider church know. Even sometimes I talk to Jenny and say, well, the building and ground talked about this, and even though she's in the same house with one other thing, she says, oh, I didn't know we were doing that, or I didn't know that was happening. So we need to widen that communication, yes. A shorter summary would be great, that we can put into the newsletter, that we can have on the website, so that we can have, how do we share our decision and actions. Yeah. 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 Yep. Mm. But even we can put it up on, put it up on our website. Here are committees. And here's what are they up to. Just a paragraph of what are they up to would be, so people have from other committees can know what you're doing, and people in general can know what you're doing. Yeah. Yep. Mm. That's probably something. Yep. 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 Okay. So running a meeting, everybody's running meetings, but so this is just a quick review. Um, Decide when you're going to meet, how, and then communicate that, not only with the committee members, but the wider church as well. Have a convener slash chair slash leader, can rotate, decided before the meeting starts. Have a recorder slash secretary decided. And check in to see how everyone is doing. Jenny does that with the board. I think she's doing that intuitively, but scientifically, there is the thing where if you do that at the beginning of the meeting, the rest of the meeting runs smoother. Because some of you have a grandchild picture that you desperately want to show someone, so you're sitting there waiting for the opportunity to spring in there and say, "Look at my grandson walking." Yeah. No. It's just that so we didn't have all these separate papers floating around. Yeah, this is not policy. This is just my sharing of some ideas that may help you work better in your committee and as a church. So yeah, or if someone's really grumpy about something, get it out at the beginning so when something comes up you're not saying, "Well, I'm really torqued off that I didn't get to eat before this, and now they're talking about food, and I'm just going to jump on it and go to town because." You say, "You know what? I'm going to be a little grumpy because I'm hungry." Then people know that, and they're not taking it personally, and you're not going to jump probably on them later because you're hungry about something that you don't like later. So yeah, have an outline or agenda to know what people expect. Be flexible as things come up because ideas pop up. The Spirit moves as the Spirit moves. And then again, yeah, what Jenny does is often good for anybody. Near the end of the meeting, review the tasks to be done so that, okay, what do we have to get done before the next meeting? Who's going to do it? What do we have to have if we're going to be looking at this? What do we need to know before that? And then decide when you'll meet next and who fills what roles. And if you have standing conveners, leaders, recorders, then you don't have to do that. But rotating is not a bad thing. Then social capital. This is something that I was just reading about, and it's kind of broadly defined, but but especially for us who call ourselves a Just Peace Church, who are talking about open and affirming, who are talking about trying to serve the community, is how our budgets, leadership, building, members, living out our mission. So does what we say in the mission statement, what we say on Sunday morning, does that line up with what we're doing in the rest of what we are, how we are living it out, how we are meeting, what we are focusing on? That's a big question. It goes back to purpose, but it's how is our church influencing our local community, wider community, the wider UCC, which we are covenanted with. So it's just thinking and stepping back and looking at it. Where we're putting our money, are we walking the talk? Is basically what it is. Do we walk the talk? And then the strength of diversity, and that has the whole 1 Corinthians in there, the body of Christ, and so it's just, and we're not going to read through it all, but it's just to remind us that we all have gifts and talents. No, some of us aren't gifted to run a meeting. That's okay. Everybody has gifts and talents, so we should help us discover what our gifts and talents are, what people's gifts and talents are, and so that it can benefit everybody within and without of the church. And to realize that, well, just because they can't run a meeting doesn't mean they shouldn't be on a committee, or just because they have no idea to do a spreadsheet, maybe they have other strengths that they can give. And it says, and then I will show you at the end, do all have gifts? Are all apostles? But strive for the greater gifts, and I'll show you the more excellent way. And then it goes into 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious, or boastful, or arrogant, or rude. Those are the greatest gifts, and that's something we all should be working on and striving for. So how do we go about this? Prayer and Scripture. Ran across something that says, people who read Scripture at least 4 times a week are generally more optimistic, are better civic sinners, more liberal ideas, donate more. It's not an absolute fact that everybody who does that will do this, but it is in general. But it is, even Jesus is supposed to have full of power in the Spirit, it says. Jesus was full of power in the Spirit. He took naps. In the midst of a crisis, he took naps. He's on the boat's sinking, he's taking a nap, he's resting up. He sent his disciples away and took care of himself. He went off to pray. He made sure that he was doing well so that he could, and he modeled that for the disciples, and he models that for us. If we're working 7 days a week, we're no good to anybody. Eventually, we're going to burn out. Eventually, we're going to be no good, especially to ourselves. So how do we build up our own strength? How do we build up our own hearts? How do we center ourselves in what we truly believe? How do we discover what we truly believe? Community, love, God, justice. So for some people, it's praying by singing. Some it's taking a walk on the beach or sitting or listening to the birds, and it should be multiple ways, because we just don't eat one food. It would be very boring if we just ate one food to give us sustenance, but we like to mix it up. And it should be that way for renewing ourselves, for praying, for being centered. I had one friend in seminary who, from 7 to 8 o'clock, he cranked his stereo, put in his worship CDs, and just sang at the top of his lungs to the annoyance of his neighbors in the apartment complex. And if you knocked on his door, he would not stop. But then by the third year, he was like, I used to have such joy, but now it's just blah. Well, have you prayed in other ways? Well, this is my prayer. Well, maybe God wants you to do more than just sing. Maybe God wants you to listen. Maybe God wants you to walk, whatever. And that changes over time, and that's okay because we grow and change over time. And then the communication agreement that has been set up and used by the board and maybe others is again, listen generously, speak respectfully, celebrate, choose the good of the whole church, strive to be optimistic and hopeful. So these are ways that we can hopefully bring us to make better decisions, to be more effective, not more efficient. Making cell phones, they're very efficient at that. I don't know if we need more cell phones. Making toy little or beanie babies, there are lots of things that we can be efficient about. And yes, we should strive for that, but we're really, as a church, effectiveness. How are we making an impact? And how are we planting the seeds? How are we watering? How are we nurturing? How are we growing? So prudence. What is most important, and how do we categorize our needs, our wants? And fortunately, this got put on back in front. I was trying to keep the paper wattage down, so 12 Keys to an Effective Church by Kevin Callahan. I read that early, and I used that in my first church, and he has some good ideas, and he has some really bad ideas too. He said, for every minute you preach, you should be spending 2 hours visiting people. And for every minute you preach, you should be doing 2 hours of Bible study. Well, if a person preached a 10-minute sermon, they'd have to spend 20 hours visiting people and 20 hours in Bible study alone. And I'm like, and what are you supposed to do all the rest of the stuff you're supposed to do? That's if you preach 10 minutes. Imagine if you preached a half hour. That's 60, 80 hours of, I don't know. But he says there are two ways of looking. Source of satisfaction, mission, pastoral and lay visitations, corporate dynamic worship, significant relational groups, strong leadership resources, streamlined structure, and a solid participating decision making. Now those are the things that raise our level of satisfaction in an organization, in a church. And he said, and he puts the number one is mission. Without a good mission, you're always going to be, well, why are we doing this? What is this about? One of the churches that I looked at here in Minnesota, but I didn't apply for because they put it right into their, well, we're an older congregation and our church and our community is slowly declining, so we just want someone that's going to preach a nice, comforting service and just make us comfortable. That was their mission, to be comfortable, to be comfortable, to be comfortable, to be comfortable, to be comfortable. All right, I didn't apply to that church. But what gets us up? What gets us moving? What gets us energized? What makes us take risks? That's the kind of church I want to be part of, and I'm thinking and I'm believing that this is the church that also wants to try to do those kind of things. So that's satisfaction. Let's shoot for the stars. But then you also have to have pastoral and lay visitations. So we have to talk to each other, and that's done in a variety of ways, and but it builds relationships. We have to get to know each other. We have to know why someone is opposed to this or that. There's a story behind that. Someone reacts in a board meeting or a committee meeting or in worship. There's a story behind it. Do we know the story of what has set them off? And can we help them heal and be listening to them? And then the corporate dynamic worship, that's That's the third one. Significant relational groups, our committees, our Tai Chi group, our sing-along group, choir, potluck sometime again. And the strong leadership resources and the streamlined structure, we are working on that. That is a work in progress. Now there's the functional characteristics. Sources of dissatisfaction if not done well. Several competent programs and activities. If they don't have that, that can kind of put people down. Open accessibility. That can put people down. High visibility, adequate parking land, landscape, adequate space and facilities. So pretty much we're pretty good. Yes, we need to make the inside fully handicap accessible, and that is a source of dissatisfaction for many. But when we get that fixed, when we get whatever we need to get in there, elevator, slide, catapult, it's not going to make people, it's going to be, okay, I don't have to worry about that, but it's not going to make people say, ooh, I love this church because it has an elevator. It's going to take away a satisfaction, but it's not going to give a satisfaction. But it's, except for that, you can now go down for the potlucks in the basement without too much of a trouble. And with a high visibility and with programs and stuff like that. And then at the bottom is solid financial resources. Most churches, most organizations will put that as the number one thing. We have to get the money. Without the money, we can't do anything. Without the money, without the resources, we might as well just close up. But in his view, it is number 12. It is the last thing. We have to worry about it, but it's the last thing we worry about. Because if we make it number 1, all the rest of the stuff falls apart. A lot of people say, well, I stopped going to that church because all they did is kept building and ask for money. Every week the sermon was on, we need more money for this, we need more money for that. Who wants to be a part of a church, a group that all they do is ask for money? But if we do all the other stuff, if we continue to improve and do all the other stuff well, then people are going to say, I like what we're doing here. I like I believe in what they're doing, and I'm going to help them. This church, besides the last couple Sundays where we're closing in on 40, this church is about half of the attendance of any church I served, of the last 3 churches. But you have about twice the budget. So in some ways, yes, we are not making budget, but in some ways it is truly amazing that the people who are giving so believe in this church that we should have about half the budget. We should have about half the giving as compared to the other churches I've served, based on numbers alone. But because people believe in this church and want to see this church succeed, they are giving at a much greater rate than the average on national. So, yes, we need to be concerned about finances and all that, but we pay attention to the other stuff, and that will help keep generating the current level of giving for others, and for others to want to be a part of this and grow with us. And there's no correlation between the relational and the functional. If we had all the money in the world, doesn't mean we're going to have a great corporate worship. If we had all the money in the world, doesn't mean we'll have strong leadership resources. In one of our sister churches in just north of Aberdeen, South Dakota, when this lady was in her when she became an adult, she inherited her dad's farmland and she inherited a business, and it wasn't much, but it was all right. And so she says, well, I should make out a will. She is financially responsible. And so she says, I'm going to give a third to the church. I'm going to give a third to the local university. I'm going to give a third to the University of Minnesota because, her grandma went there, was one of the first women to graduate from the University of Minnesota. When she died, she wasn't worth much, but when she died, she was very good. She was worth $52 million. So that church got $14 million. They averaged 10 people in a service. And now they had $14 million. And I would like to say, and the church is probably the size of the community is probably the size of Finland, 120 people in that community. But is the church bustling? All of a sudden, their membership doubled. But most people thought, well, hey, I'll be on the board and we can start paying our board of directors a stipend. So just having, so yes, there is a difference between where we're at and where they are at, but, solid financial, yes, we should have solid financial resources. Yes, we should be able to pay our bills. Yes, we should have enough to invest into our building and into our programs. But without all the other stuff, it means nothing. So we talk about adventuring. We're living in the ooze, as I said. And as I've said again and again, almost all other churches are in the same spot we are. How do we find who or what a member is? What do we call them? How do we live out this? Phyllis Tickle, who I can't remember if she passed away or not, but she says, we're in a 500-year garage sale, just like the Protestants in the Catholic Church. They got rid of the stained glass windows. They got rid of the saints. They got rid of this. We're in that process right now. We're in a spiritual garage sale, saying these things that we have been doing, since the 1950s especially, are not working anymore. But we have not found what's going to replace it yet. So we got to try new things. And number 3, the unavoidable reality is that the new solution will result in a loss. Some of the things we're going to try, some people are like, well, okay, I was up to you now, but that was really important to me, and if you're going to lose that, I'm no longer going to be a part of the church. I'm no longer going to come to this community. I don't know what that is. We don't know what that is until we do it. But we cannot just sit and say, well, let's do nothing and hold on to everybody as much as possible until we get this figured out. There is no clear answers. Anybody who says different, selling snake oil. So it's necessary for both leaders and followers, not just those who are here, but all who are part of us, to grow. And think about what is really important to me, what is really important to this church. How do we take the next step? We don't have to have the end goal in sight. We just take the next step, realizing that we don't know where we're going to land. The disciples following Jesus didn't know Jesus was going to die. Didn't know that he was going to be resurrected. Didn't know that the responsibility was going to fall on them. They thought they were just going to be followers their whole lives. And I heard that a couple times at our board of directors meeting. I was a pew sitter, and I decided I can no longer be a pew sitter. Pew sitters are good. We need all types of people in our congregation. And maybe we need to get rid of the pews and try something different in the sanctuary. That's it. They're leaving. So, Brene Brown, who has done a lot of stuff on vulnerability, and if you read her book, she says, I hate vulnerability, but that is truly the only way. What does Jesus say? To be a leader, you can't be great, you must be a servant of all. To be a leader, you must be like a child. To be strong, Paul says, when I am weak, that is when the church is at its strongest. There are lots of church leaders and lots of people, oh, we need to man up, we need to cowboy up, we need to ground ourselves, we need to empower ourselves, we need to believe exactly this. That's not the UCC way, that's not this church way. But to model and encourage healthy striving and empathy and using power with, power to, power within, rather than power over. Again, number 12, modeling and supporting rest, play, and recovery. In one of my churches in North Dakota, they were a bunch of worker bees. And so I said, we need to have some fun, so let's have a potluck. So we had a potluck, and I set up some games. And they just sat there and went like this until it was time to clean up. And then they got up, and then they were jumped up, and then they were energized, because now we have something to do. We have to play. We have to reconnect, restore, rejuvenate. Leading from the heart. So as board of directors, we're talking about as in our retreat that's yet to be decided, we're going to be talking about a little bit about what do we call ourselves. We're not going to call ourselves potato peelers. We're not going to call ourselves members. So how do we define ourselves in a way that is inclusive, that is a way that is open, and in a way that is affirming? How do we make sure that we are, yes, inclusive, but still that we are a body? That we aren't just a bunch of small little groups just kind of occasionally bumping into each other, but that we can come together and each of us is working on a part of what it means to be the church, but that we are still the church. We still have the connections with each other. Any questions or thoughts? All right. I'm gonna pause because because we are taping this for people so actually yeah, we do have this, so yes, I'm putting you on the spot, so if you would use that
think all churches are going through these challenges, and I'm really happy that you're framing this and giving us the opportunity to address the challenges.
I think in the last 2 years I've been feeling like there's sort of like a waiting for us to become, and now it feels more like we're becoming. And I'm hoping that the leadership, however we define that, I mean, defining membership is one thing, defining leadership is another whole other ball of wax, but that leadership can be that is encouraging participation. There has been in the last 2 years a sort of, we need people to do this, and there's sort of been a little bit of a it's that deafening silence. But if you go to somebody and say, hey, Peter, would you do this? Oh yeah. So it's almost this individual invitation that has to happen, and I'm hoping that we're starting to move forward. Other people saying, oh, that needs to be done, I should get involved in that kind of idea. I think it's under here in that this participatory decision making, that it's part of because we've asked that the congregation have more power again, and so you have to claim that. You can't just want it and then dismiss it, I guess.
I say part of it helps to get to know each other, because then you know who to ask, you know what their capabilities are. So that's something too, is getting to know each other. And as I recall the membership issue years ago, which was just a hearsay on my part, because my family was coming, I wasn't really here, that it was a way to get more participation, because at the time it was written that you had to be a member to be on certain committees, and they didn't have enough people on the committees, and with people coming, some in the summer, some in the winter, people weren't here all the time, and they felt like, well, let's just open it up and we'll get more people. So I think that was, I don't know if that's, anybody else remembers that, but that was my sense of it.
I don't have this thought completely formed yet, but I think people want to belong, whether they consider themselves members or friends of the church or whatever, and belonging goes two ways. The individual has a responsibility to participate in things if they want to belong, but also the church has a responsibility to reach out to people. And maybe we need to find new ways to reach out to people that aren't just asking them to do work. And there are things going on, the sing-along on Wednesday nights and various things. But there may be other things that we need to think of to reach people. And I think some of that could be electronic. I heard somebody mention Nancy doesn't like that idea. It doesn't have to be all electronic, but maybe that can be incorporated into a prayer chain. During workshop today, I heard somebody mention prayer chain, and maybe there are ways to reach out to people. It's just, throwing something out. But I do think it has to go both ways.
It's just kind of an observation that it seems like the activity, I mean, we have certainly had the backbone, the spine. Jenny, you have been such a spine. Yeah, during this time, and that has to be there. But I think what we've been doing is what the peace prayer that you read today, Carol. In all the busyness, you can get caught up and just got to be busy. We got to do. It's like, oh, wait. Or we can slow down and listen in the silence and then make that our work. I think we are doing such a wonderful job getting to know one another, slowing down, allowing for silence. And it's an organic way to, prepare the soil, and we will see the fruit. I think, like you said today, Enno, it's going to be slow. But I think we're doing it. We're in the ooze, and we're being attentive to it. And, a conversation like this is part of that growth, part of that becoming. So I feel good.
Got to push it up twice.
Okay. On the about contacting people on the discovery team, as Barb knows, we divided names up and called people to ask them questions on different things, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Thank you for thinking of me. I'm so glad you called. And I do know at least 4 or 5 people who don't do electronics at all for whatever reason. I think we need to. Somebody mentioned phone trees today as a communication, and I think we need to remember that there are people still who don't do that, and we need to personally or by telephone reach out. Yeah.
So I think whenever there's a hang up about a word like member, then you just broaden it. So members and friends, for instance, but there's no distinction really. So people can call themselves what they want, but they can find the comfortable word and be included. But we don't, as a congregation, I don't think we want to be in the business of us and them, or choosing who to belong. People decide themselves, and then they get to call themselves what they want. We make it broad.
Say it again, Sam.
So when I was working, I let everybody define their own title. Then they were always happy with who they were and what they were called. So, but I had a lot of weird theories. But one of the things I always like to stress is, there's no perfect communication, but the most effective communication is eyeball to eyeball, one-on-one. So, that's a skill I think we should work on, and, as we move forward, because we all know people and, how we can get people involved. But the best way is just look them right in the eye and just have a chat with them. And, I have 4 pages on leadership at home, all my sayings. So.
Anne, how about closing us out with a song? Well,
I have a question that's something that just came to me.
yeah,
Maybe that's just
it's official now.
thinking out loud. Just when you were talking about money, how it's not necessary, it needs to be there, but it's what you do with it and how you do with it. I was thinking about that in regards to our spirituality, versus doing work of justice in the community. Like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, I guess, or does it matter that we have a focus on spirituality when it comes to the peace and justice work that we do? So maybe I'm putting the question out there, like, when you're real.
into that question, because I think we've been focusing really well on our spirituality, and that it's been very, very good.